Long before the first temples rose from stone, before words found their way into song and scripture, animals were already speaking. Not in human language, but through energy, behavior, and presence, through a kind of silent intelligence that resonated with the cosmos. Today, in a world driven by noise and speed, that original connection has faded into the background. Yet, it hasn't disappeared. In quiet moments, when a dog sits beside grief without needing to understand it, or when a bird appears in a moment of prayer, we catch glimpses of something deeper, something timeless. There is a hidden role animals have played in humanity's spiritual evolution, one that transcends culture, species, and even the boundary between physical and spiritual. They have walked beside humans as silent witnesses, emotional mirrors, and sometimes as guides through realms we barely remember. But what role are they playing now? And what might they still be here to teach? Want to find out? Let's delve into it. Across the ancient world, animals weren't studied. They were revered. In Native American traditions, each animal was believed to carry its own medicine, an energy signature, a spiritual presence that guided clans, shaped rituals, and influenced destinies. These weren't just symbolic placeholders. The wolf, the eagle, the bear, each held a distinct frequency, woven into human life like a second heartbeat. Spirit animals didn't just walk beside people. They walked through them, mirroring strengths, fears, and untapped gifts. To dream of a certain animal was to receive a message from the unseen. In Egypt, gods wore the faces of beasts. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe, governed wisdom and the moon. Bastet, with the head of a cat, protected the home with fierce grace. Anubis, the jackal-headed guide of souls, guarded the threshold between life and death. These weren't arbitrary forms. They reflected how Egyptians perceived spiritual forces, not distant, formless ideas, but intelligences expressed through the natural world. The animal form made the divine relatable, visceral, embodied. Hinduism took a different approach. Animals weren't just sacred symbols, they were companions to gods themselves. Nandi the bull, ever still in his devotion to Shiva, wasn't just a mount. He was a gatekeeper of spiritual discipline. Garuda, the eagle being who carried Vishnu, symbolized the soul's flight above ignorance. The cow remains deeply sacred in Hindu life, not for its utility, but for its embodiment of abundance, patience, and maternal grace. In each case, the animal was not lesser than the human. It was the vessel through which the divine expressed itself in the visible world. Even in shamanic traditions of the Pacific Northwest and Aboriginal Australia, animals were seen as ancestral echoes. Totems weren't simply representations, they were living archetypes, pulsing with memory. A totem wasn't chosen, it revealed itself, often during states of altered consciousness. It spoke through vision, ritual, or instinct, pulling the human toward a path written in energy rather than ink. But across these cultures, a common truth emerged. Animals were not interpreted as primitive. They were seen as ancient, beings whose wisdom came not from language or reason, but from alignment. Alignment with nature's rhythm, with celestial cycles, with the earth's breath. Their power wasn't in dominance, but in attunement. They didn't need temples. Their bodies were temples. In every mythology where animals appeared, they weren't passive background figures. They were bridges, not between man and beast, but between realms, between seen and unseen. Whether feathered, scaled, hoofed, or clawed, animals carried a kind of memory older than civilization. This ancient reverence wasn't romanticism, it was recognition. A knowing that to ignore the intelligence of animals was to cut off access to a whole dimension of spiritual reality. And though modern culture has largely forgotten these frameworks, the memory lingers in artifacts, in dreams, in the silent way a cat watches an empty corner of a room, or a crow lands with curious timing. What if these weren't accidents of behavior? What if they were echoes? And what if the real mystery is not whether animals are spiritual, but whether humanity ever learned how to listen? Some knowledge doesn't speak, it reflects. In the presence of animals, whether wild or domestic, something quiet begins to surface in the human field. Anxiety softens, guarded hearts loosen, grief, often ignored by the world, suddenly has a place to land. It isn't coincidence, it's recognition. Throughout history, animals have acted as emotional mirrors, not by choice, but by nature. A deer bolts in the presence of fear. A horse resists a rider carrying anger in the body. A dog senses unease before a word is spoken. Their reactions aren't behavioral, they're energetic. What science calls intuition, ancient traditions called sensitivity to vibration. And this sensitivity might be more than just instinct. It might be a form of consciousness that operates below language, but far above chance. Modern research is catching up. Dogs trained to detect seizures or cancers do so with eerie accuracy, often before medical instruments can confirm a diagnosis. Cats have been known to curl beside terminal patients in hospitals, seemingly aware of death's approach. Birds sense atmospheric changes. Elephants mourn their dead. These aren't random behaviors. They point to a shared emotional field, one that animals seem more attuned to than humans. But beyond survival or adaptation, there is something else happening. A presence. When a cat settles on a chest during heartbreak, when a dog rests its head beside illness, something shifts. Not just chemically, but energetically. They hold space. And unlike human interactions, so often cluttered by words, judgments, and projections, animals offer something purer, non-interference. They don't try to fix, analyze, or interpret. They receive. In doing so, they teach a lesson that even the wisest philosophers have struggled to grasp, that healing doesn't always come through answers, but through witness. In shamanic healing practices, animals are often invited into ceremony not as props, but as participants. A bird's flight can signify release. A serpent's shedding mirrors transformation. The animal doesn't perform the healing. It simply reflects the shift already occurring within the person, as if their presence activates something dormant in the human body, a kind of cellular memory that knows how to realign once it's been seen. This extends beyond the personal. Entire herds of animals have been documented changing their migratory paths before natural disasters. In some indigenous African traditions, it's said that when communities fall out of spiritual balance, animals begin to act strangely. The shift in human frequency, they say, disrupts the harmony of the land, and the animals feel it first. Not because they are less evolved, but perhaps because they are more in tune. This attunement isn't about intellect, it's about coherence. Animals live in a state that many humans strive to reach through meditation, breathwork, or therapy, a kind of present awareness unburdened by identity. They remind, they regulate, they absorb. And in their silence, they often reveal more about a person's state than any mirror or machine could. Perhaps animals don't heal in the way we expect, but they create the space where healing becomes possible, not as doctors, as witnesses of truth. And perhaps, even more intriguingly, as co-travelers on a shared evolutionary path. Many spiritual traditions didn't just view animals as passive companions or reflections. They saw them as beings undergoing their own spiritual evolution, parallel to, and sometimes intertwined with, humanity's awakening. Edgar Cayce, the renowned American mystic, once spoke of a future in which animals would become more telepathic, able to communicate with humans not through sound, but through consciousness. His readings hinted at a time when the wall between species would thin, revealing a deeper energetic rapport. Not only would humans evolve in awareness, but animals, too, would rise in spiritual frequency. This idea wasn't unique to Cayce. In the Prophecies of the Andean Q'ero people, it's said that as Pachacuti, the time of great turning, unfolds, all beings begin to remember their original light. Not just humans, but the rivers, the mountains, and yes, the animals. They speak of a return to harmony between species, where the jaguar and the child, the condor and the elder, all share the same spiritual breath. In Aboriginal lore, the dream time isn't a place in the past. It's an ongoing reality that certain animals still move through. Animals in this worldview were not trapped in the linear cycle of birth and death the way humans were. They were closer to the source, less distracted, less forgetful. Their behaviors, migrations, even their gazes were read as messages from the dreaming. Many elders believe that animals hold keys to parts of consciousness humans have lost. This reframes evolution. It's not a ladder with humans at the top, it's a web, a living intelligence expanding in all directions. There are growing reports, anecdotal but consistent, of animals behaving in unexpectedly aware ways. Horses that respond to unspoken trauma. Birds that gather at homes during moments of emotional rupture. Dogs who sense not just illness, but intention. Even animals in the wild appearing in synchronistic patterns, aligning with personal transformations or planetary events. Could this be a signal? Perhaps the spiritual shift so often spoken about in human terms is not ours alone. Perhaps animals are not just affected by human consciousness, they're evolving alongside it. If so, their presence is not ornamental, it's collaborative. This shift isn't about animals becoming human-like. It's about humans becoming more receptive to forms of intelligence that don't rely on speech, logic, or dominance. Telepathy, emotional resonance, subtle energy communication. These aren't fantasy. They're functions of an expanding awareness that both species may be stepping into. In moments of crisis, ecological, emotional, global, animals often respond before humans fully grasp what's happening. Their bodies become tuning forks, registering vibrational shifts before they manifest physically. Could this attunement be a kind of early warning system, or something deeper, a form of vibrational support? What if certain animals are not just adapting to human evolution, but accelerating it? And what if the reason they're still here, despite habitat loss, war, extinction, isn't survival, but service, not as symbols, as participants in a quiet revolution of consciousness? And in this revolution, the relationship between human and animal is not built on control or hierarchy. It's a partnership, one that has always existed beneath the surface of civilization, largely unspoken but deeply felt. This isn't about dominance, it's about mutual resonance. In many esoteric teachings, it's believed that certain animals choose to incarnate near humans, not by accident, but by intention. These are not pets by default. They're companions in a sacred agreement. They take on the density of physical form, knowing the risks, the limitations, even the pain, in order to assist in the transformation of human energy fields. Whether through comfort, disruption, or presence, they serve a spiritual function. During times of collective upheaval, plagues, wars, natural disasters, animals have always remained, not just surviving, but observing, sometimes bearing the energetic weight humans are unwilling or unable to process. It's why so many people report their pets falling ill when their households are in emotional chaos, or why animals in shelters often carry deep trauma. They absorb more than attention. They absorb atmosphere, but they also anchor it. In moments of personal breakdown or spiritual awakening, animals often become more than background figures. Their eyes seem to hold more weight. Their timing becomes precise. A dog curling closer, a bird singing at the moment of release. It's as though they're aware of a threshold being crossed, and they stand at the edge, silently holding the space. Some spiritual intuitives suggest that animals function as stabilizers in the human energy grid. That a cat perched at the foot of a bed isn't merely resting, it's calibrating. That a horse leaning its head against a grieving body isn't offering comfort in the human sense, but merging fields, sharing weight, redistributing energy. Not every animal plays this role. Some are simply living their own soul paths. But many, especially those drawn into close human contact, seem to carry a sense of mission. Consider the animals who stay with the wounded, the ones who refuse to leave the side of a dying loved one, the ones who appear out of nowhere at turning points in life, then vanish again. These are not random acts. In spiritual terms, they could be expressions of voluntary service, beings who come not to teach, but to accompany. And perhaps most profound of all is how they model presence. Animals don't time travel through regret or anticipation. They live now, fully, without fragmentation. In doing so, they invite humanity to do the same, not by preaching, but by example. This isn't sentimentality, it's a kind of quiet metaphysics, a reality where certain beings lower their vibration into physical form not for their own evolution, but to assist in ours, not from a place of lack, but from love. In the great unfolding of human awakening, animals are not spectators, they are co-weavers. And as the veil between worlds thins, their role becomes harder to ignore, not because they are changing, but because humans are finally beginning to see. Yet sight alone isn't enough. Recognition requires a shift, not just in how animals are viewed, but in how they are listened to. Not with ears tuned to language, but with an inner stillness tuned to presence. Modern life rarely allows for that kind of stillness. The world is noisy, urgent, scattered. But animals are subtle. Their messages don't interrupt. They emerge, often in silence, in nuance, in patterns that only become clear with attention. The call now is to listen differently, to move from command to communion. This listening doesn't require belief in mysticism or the supernatural. It begins with slowing down, watching an animal, not for entertainment or obedience, but for signal, a twitch of the ear, a prolonged stare, the way a bird appears repeatedly at the same hour, or a dog refuses to enter a particular room. These are not random quirks. They're part of a dialogue few are taught to hear. Silent observation becomes a form of participation, a way of entering into the energetic field animals operate in naturally, sitting beside a horse without expectation, letting a cat lead the rhythm of the room, walking near trees and noticing which creatures appear and when. Even the dream world becomes part of this exchange. In many cultures, animals in dreams aren't symbols. They are visitors, messengers, guardians. A snake in sleep might signal transformation. A wolf might represent protection during psychic transition. These aren't just projections of the subconscious. They may be bridges through which spiritual allies speak. Some who practice dream work keep journals just for animal encounters, tracking the timing, the behavior, the emotional charge. Patterns begin to emerge. Repeated visits. Animals that show up only in moments of deep inner change. Sometimes a wild creature enters the dream the night before a major decision or loss. Sometimes it's the same animal seen days later in waking life, as if to confirm its presence wasn't imagined. It was felt across the veil. Meditation with animals is another portal, not teaching them to sit still, but allowing oneself to slow to their rhythm. Breathing beside a dog, letting the nervous system entrain to the steady pulse of a resting animal. Some healers describe these shared moments as energetic realignments. Others simply call it peace. Either way, something shifts, not outside, but inside. These practices aren't meant to use animals for spiritual gain. They are invitations. Invitations to reconnect with a mode of knowing that predates culture and complexity. A knowing that is remembered, not learned. The deeper truth is this: animals have never stopped speaking. They've simply been waiting for humans to listen in the right direction, not upward toward abstraction, but downward and inward toward the earth, the breath, the pause. Where language falls away and something more ancient takes its place, not louder, just clearer. Maybe that's the real miracle, not that animals are spiritual, but that they've always been, and humanity is only just beginning to remember. Not all spiritual teachers write books. Some purr, some howl, Some circle overhead with wings stretched wide, casting shadows shaped like omens. Perhaps wisdom was never meant to be confined to speech or scripture. Perhaps it was scattered, furred, feathered, scaled, across the living world, waiting to be encountered rather than decoded. In a time when humanity stands at the edge of ecological collapse, digital saturation, and existential fatigue, the soft gaze of an animal might be more than comfort. It might be a signal, a prompt to return, not just to nature, but to relation. To re-enter the web of life not as managers, but as members. To touch the earth with less ambition and more awareness. To meet the eyes of a creature not as an owner, but as a listener. Because maybe the greatest teachers don't speak at all. Maybe they show up beside grief or joy or stillness and remind us how to be, without pretense, without narrative, without resistance. And if that's true, then what else has been missed? What other messages have arrived in feathers and paw prints only to be dismissed as coincidence? In a world slowly awakening from slumber, it isn't just humans who are shifting. The entire web of life is stirring. Every ripple of awareness we experience may echo outward, received, reflected, and amplified by the very beings we once overlooked. So the question now isn't whether animals are spiritual. The question is, are we finally becoming still enough, quiet enough, open enough to hear what they've been saying all along?